Each time you switch between projects of different system unit, you will get this message. The project that we wish to open is in meters, while the current system unit is in centimeters. If you choose to rescale the file objects to the system unit, this will scale down the project from meters to centimeters. This might be the perfect choice in some cases. However, I wish to continue working on this project in meters as reference for the system unit. In our case, the choice I will go with is adopt the file's unit scale. Good day everyone and welcome to this tutorial. Sharing assets between projects is something every designer usually do in order to save time. In this tutorial, we will shed some light on different methods of sharing assets between projects. Next, I am going to start with the method that I commonly use, and I will explain why I do prefer using it. In this method, I will use export selection. I will focus on OBJ file format, developed by Wavefront Technologies, and FBX file format, developed by Kidera, and owned by Autodesk since 2006. Both file formats are engineered to pack geometry, and these are the two file formats we will uncover in this tutorial. Sharing assets between projects of different unit system can be problematic. This tutorial will guide you step by step for proper exporting of assets from 3ds Max. Select the assets you want to export. Go to Export, then Export Selected, and select FBX file format. Export the FBX file with a proper name. If you set your project folder correctly, the export command will store any exportation automatically inside the export folder located in your project folder. I already have an old exportation, so I am going to overlap it. Once you hit the Save button, the FBX Importer window will appear. The FBX plugin can store geometry, animations, cameras, lights, and embed media associated with the exported assets. Each one of these categories has its own settings and options. However, our concern for this exportation is on the geometry and the unit scale options. Let's open the Geometry submenu. These are the default settings for the geometry. Make sure that the Smoothing Groups option is enabled. Normally, I do export all my assets and projects as triangles. We still can do this by enabling the Triangulate option. However, I will proceed without enabling this option. Later, we will uncover the other geometry options in details. Under the Advanced options, set the unit scale factor on automatic, or leave it at the project system unit. Keep in mind, this project system unit is in centimeters. We need to remember this when importing this exported file into other projects. Since we're still here, let's export this selection into OBJ file format. Export the OBJ file with a proper name. Again, I have an old exportation, so I am going to overlap it. This time, I will export the assets as triangles, and I do recommend this option for all exports. The precision value in the OBJ exporter determine the accuracy of the vertices locations inside the 3D space. The higher the number, the more precise the vertices locations are. However, the higher the precision number, the bigger the size of the stored file. I use 4 decimal as precision value when exporting the first level of detail, especially the interior. I use 3 decimal for the other levels. These are my recommendations for the precision value. Although, you can increase the precision value up to 12 decimal This will tremendously affect your machine and game performance. I have disabled the material options, since I am not going to use these textures or materials in my new projects. You may notice the flexibility of whether to export the asset's textures or not in the OBJ exporter, which is something I do wish the FBX exporter has. I will leave the scale value unaltered, and I am going to export the scene assets with smoothing groups, normals, and texture coordinates, also known as UV maps. This is the structure of any project folder when it properly created by 3ds Max. You should find all the related media associated with the project within these folders. Any media files that is not stored within the project folder can be problematic when sending or moving the project folder to another location. For consistency, I have copied the exported files we created from this project to the import folder of the project that we are working on. Each project has MXP file, which is max path file. The MXP file often carry the same name as the project folder. When opening the MXP file with Notepad, you will find all the relative and absolute path information of the project, including the shared libraries location installed with 3ds Max. Next, we will do 2 separate imports of the FBX, then the OBJ files, into our ongoing project. A quick reminder, the current project system unit is in meters, while the assets we want to import are in centimeters. I want you to keep an eye on the layers names and colors that currently exist. Go to Import, then import non-native file format into 3ds Max. 3ds Max will open the import folder of the current project automatically, although you can navigate to other locations. For convenience reasons, keep all files and media associated with your project inside the project folder. Now, let's import the FBX file. Under Statistics, you can find all the related information to the imported file. The relative path, the plugin version that created the file, the creation time. You will find also the original system unit and the current project system unit. The FBX file stores the relative location for the materials and the textures associated with the 3D objects. Under Geometry, enable the Smoothing Groups option. We do not need to import any animation, cameras, or lights. Disable all these options. Under Advanced Options, set the file unit converted to centimeters. This will keep the scale factor value at 1 and maintain the imported file's scale unaltered. If you change the file units, the scale factor value will change. This will lead to undesirable scaling problems. Hit OK to import the FBX file. Immediately after importing the FBX file, you will notice the change in the layers colors and the added new layers to the scene. The FBX file respect and store the project hierarchy when the project is arranged into groups and/or layers. The color scheme of the old project's layers have overlapped the current one. depending on how you see this feature is very helpful when exporting the entire project, then importing it to a new empty scene. However, we do not have any control over the imported old layers and their color scheme. Let's take a look at the imported assets. We did not have any scaling dilemma, however, we have a texture misalignment. Before diving into the cause and the causality, we need to clear some important features about the FBX file. We did not actually export or embed any media or textures or materials with the FBX file. However, the FBX importer has imported the texture and the material associated with the 3D objects. The FBX file stores the relative path for the textures on the disk. Since I did not change or move the old project folder, the FBX importer can find those textures and associate them with the imported 3D objects. However, if I send this FBX file to another user, or move the old project folder, missing textures or materials might occur when importing this FBX file. Needless to say, if we save this scene after importing the FBX file, we will create a link between different projects, which is something I do not intend to do, and I do not recommend, because there are some reasons for creating separate projects folders, and we need to respect that. Each project folder should act as a separate unit that can be moved or relocated without affecting or being dependent upon other projects. The topic might be confusing, but after knowing and understanding how the FBX works, things will become clearer. Let's add Unwrap UVW modifier and inspect the UV map. The UV map seems to be fine, however, some UVs have incorrect orientation, which leads to the texture misalignment. We could unwrap these UVs to match the texture coordinates, however, this is not the right approach to solve this case. First, you need to know the main cause of this fault to avoid it in future exports. We did export these assets in mixed quadro and tri-polygons. The texture misalignment occurred only on the quadro surfaces. As I mentioned earlier, I always export my assets and projects in triangles. This is exactly what we have done in the OBJ export. Let's import the OBJ file. I always prefer to import any new OBJ assets inside the default layer. Select and highlight the default layer to import the OBJ file into it. Unlike the FBX file, the OBJ file does not store nor respect any assets hierarchy, layers, or groups. Go to Import, then import non-native file format into 3ds Max. Once you select the OBJ file to import, the OBJ Importer plugin will appear. Under the Objects options, enable Import as Editable Poly. Enable this option for further geometry editing. When this option is disabled, the plugin will import all assets as editable mesh. The editable mesh has few support inside 3ds Max. For further editing, you need to stick with the newest geometry structure, which is the editable poly. If you enable Reset Scene, this option will delete the current scene, then import the OBJ file into a new empty scene. The prefix input box allow you to append any text before the name of each imported object. The Import as Single Mesh option, when enabled, the plugin will combine all objects into one single object and give the object the same name as the file. Since we did export the OBJ file in triangles, there is no need to enable the Retriangulate Polygons option. Under Geometry, enable Flip ZY axis, since we did enable Flip YZ axis in the exporter. Also, enable Texture Coordinates and Smoothing Groups. The Center Pivots option, when enabled, it will center the pivot of each object to the center of the object. I do prefer to keep all pivots at the center of the world, so that I always disable this option. The Shapes, Lines option allow you to import splines, if existed, since the file does not contain any. A red circle indicates this feature is not present in the OBJ file. Under Normals, enable Import from File or Import from Smoothing Groups. Both features are available on the imported file. I always choose Import Normals from the file. There are a lot of details and information about normals. We will save them for future tutorials. Under Units and Scale, make sure the object scale value is at 1. Do not convert or change the model unit unless you know exactly what you are doing. Otherwise, you may end having a scaling dilemma. I have disabled all the material options since the imported file does not have any. However, the plugin will import the UV map for each object, and the default channel, or bump, will be channel 1. You can use scripts to create a lot of things inside 3ds Max. The OBJ plugin allows you to write a log file at the imported OBJ files. When a script is used to import those OBJ files. Currently, the scripts and the programming topic is beyond this series' objectives. There are a lot of software that can export OBJ files. The OBJ Importer allows you to customize the imported OBJ features from any outsourced program. Then you can select the program and its customized import features from the present list. Hit Import to import the OBJ file to the current scene. As expected, the imported files has no materials or textures, and 3ds Max has assigned a primary object color to all the imported assets. However, the assigned color is by object, and I need it to be by layer. So that, when moving each of these assets to the corresponding layer, the object color will switch to the layer's color. I am going to select the highest level of detail of these assets in order to check its texture coordinates. I already have a material called UV Checker. I am going to assign this material to the object. Everything looks fine, and this concludes our objectives from this tutorial. There are some regulations that we need to understand and follow for proper assets exportation from 3ds Max. For a better explanation, we will extend the exploration of these topics in the next chapter.